The silence was louder than the shout. In a greasy diner on 4th Street, a man worth $6 billion just screamed at a 60-year-old woman over a spilled drop of coffee. He thought he was untouchable. He thought she was nobody. He leaned in his face, red with rage, and asked the question that ruins arrogant men. "Do you have any idea who I am?" She didn't flinch. She just wiped the counter, looked him dead in the eye, and whispered 6 words that would cost him his empire. "You think you know power. Wait until you meet the waitress who brought a billionaire to his knees without lifting a finger." This is the story of Richard Dalton, and why you should never ever judge a book by its cover. The rain in Chicago wasn't just rain. It was a cold, industrial sheet of grey that soaked into your bones. But Richard Dalton didn't feel the cold. He didn't feel much of anything these days, except the adrenaline of the kill. Richard sat in the back of his obsidian black Maybach, his thumbs flying across the screen of his phone. At 42, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Dalton Kensington Holdings. He was a shark in a bespoke Italian suit, a man whose net worth fluctuated by millions while he brushed his teeth. Today was the day. The Meridian deal. "Talk to me, George." Richard barked into his headset, ignoring the driver Thomas, who was navigating the morning gridlock with sweaty palms. "It's tight. Richard," George's voice crackled in his ear. George was his chief legal officer, a man who had aged 20 years in the last 5 working for Dalton. "The board is wavering. They're worried about the PR fallout from the factory closures in Ohio. If we don't secure the vote by noon, the acquisition falls through. And if it falls through, the stock takes a nosedive." Richard scoffed, looking out the tinted window at the miserable pedestrians scurrying under umbrellas. "They won't vote no. Everyone has a price, George. Find out who is wavering and offer them a seat on the new board, or threaten to bury their pet projects. I don't care how you do it. Just get me the votes. I'm meeting with the mysterious majority shareholder at 1 p.m. I need the board locked before I walk into that room." "We still don't know who the majority shareholder is, Richard," George reminded him nervously. "It's a blind trust. The Atlas Group. We're walking into that meeting blind. I don't need eyes to win, George. I need leverage. Fix it." Richard ended the call and threw the phone onto the leather seat. He rubbed his temples. He hadn't slept in 3 days. The Meridian deal wasn't just business. It was survival. He had leveraged everything, his personal assets, his reputation, even the liquid capital of his subsidiaries, to buy this competitor. If the deal failed, he wasn't just broke. He was finished. He would be prosecuted for over-leveraging. It was a house of cards held together by his own arrogance. "Sir," Thomas the driver spoke up tentatively. "What?" Richard snapped. "The engine light. The car is overheating. I have to pull over." Richard's eyes went wide. "You have to be kidding me. We are 10 blocks from the office. I have a pre-meeting strategy session in 20 minutes. I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton. If I keep driving, the engine block will crack. I have to pull into this service station." The Maybach sputtered and died, coasting into a grimy parking lot next to a run-down establishment with a flickering neon sign that read, "Mars Kettle." It was a relic of a forgotten Chicago, squeezed between 2 towering glass high-rises under construction. Richard cursed a string of profanities that made Thomas flinch. He kicked the door open, stepping right into a puddle of oil and rainwater. His $3,000 Oxfords were ruined instantly. "Call a backup car. Now," Richard screamed at Thomas. "It'll be 15 minutes, sir. Traffic is gridlocked." Richard looked at the sky, then at the diner. He needed Wi-Fi. He needed caffeine. And he needed to get out of the rain before he looked like a drowned rat for the biggest meeting of his life. He stormed toward Mars Kettle. He didn't see a diner. He saw a waiting room for losers. He pushed the door open, the little bell above it, jingling cheerfully, a sound that annoyed him instantly. The place smelled of bacon grease, old coffee, and lemon cleaner. It was mostly empty, save for a construction worker, nursing a pie in the corner, and a young couple arguing in a booth. Richard marched to the cleanest-looking table near the window, wiped a crumb off the vinyl seat with his handkerchief, and sat down. He pulled out his laptop and 2 phones. He was the center of the universe. The rest of the world was just background noise. He had no idea that the background noise was about to bite back. Coffee, black, and make it fast. I have a conference call in 3 minutes. Richard barked without looking up from his screen. He didn't see the woman who approached his table. If he had looked, really looked, he might have noticed something. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s, with hair the color of steel wool tied back in a sensible bun. Her uniform was pink, dated and frayed at the collar, but immaculately pressed. Her name tag slightly crooked read, Maggie. She had hands that looked like they had worked hard every day of their existence, knuckles, slightly swollen skin like parchment. But her eyes were sharp, a piercing blue that seemed out of place in a face weary with age. "Coming right up, Hon," Maggie said. Her voice was raspy, warm like dry leaves scraping together. "Don't call me Hon," Richard muttered, typing furiously. "Just bring the coffee." Maggie paused for a fraction of a second. She looked at the top of his head, her expression unreadable. She didn't apologize. She simply turned and walked back to the counter. Richard connected to the diner's spotty Wi-Fi. He started a video call with his board of directors. He put in his AirPods. "Gentlemen," Richard said, putting on his master of the universe voice. "I know you're worried about the Ohio vote, but let me assure you, I have the situation under control. The projections show a 300% growth in Q4 if we merge." He was in the zone. He was selling the dream. He was lying through his teeth, but he was doing it beautifully. Then Maggie returned. She carried a pot of steaming coffee and a thick ceramic mug. She placed the mug down. As she began to pour, the door to the diner opened. A gust of wind blew in, catching a stack of napkins on the table. Maggie instinctively reached out to grab them, and in the movement, her elbow bumped the coffee pot. It wasn't a lot. Maybe 3 tablespoons of hot black liquid. But gravity did the rest. The coffee splashed over the rim of the mug, cascaded off the table edge, and landed directly on the thigh of Richard's grey trousers. The reaction was instantaneous. Richard jumped up his chair, screeching against the linoleum. The sudden movement knocked the table, sending the rest of the coffee mug spilling onto his laptop, his lifeline, the machine holding the presentation for the merger. The screen flickered. The faces of his board of directors distorted, froze, and then went black. Silence descended on the diner. Richard stood there, his pants scalded, and stained his laptop, dripping dark liquid onto the floor. He stared at the black screen. The deal, the presentation. The backup files were on the cloud, but he couldn't access them without the device's security token. He slowly looked up at Maggie. She was holding a rag, reaching out to dab the table. "Oh dear. I'm so sorry, sir. The wind just... You stupid cow." The scream tore through the air, causing the construction worker in the corner to drop his fork. Richard didn't just yell. He exploded. The stress of the last 3 days, the fear of bankruptcy, the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. It all funneled into a beam of pure hatred directed at this elderly waitress. "Look at this!" Richard roared, gesturing to his crotch and his computer. "Do you have any idea what you just did? That computer is worth more than this entire building. The suit cost more than you make in a decade." Maggie stopped wiping. She stood up straight. She didn't cower. She didn't cry. She just held the rag. "It was an accident, sir. I'll get some club soda for the pants." "I don't want club soda." Richard slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "I want competence. I want to know why someone like you is allowed to walk around breathing the same air as productive members of society. You're incompetent. You're useless." The young couple in the booth grabbed their coats and ran out the door without paying. The cook peered out from the kitchen, a large man with a beard looking ready to step in. Maggie held up a hand to stop him. Richard wasn't finished. He leaned in close to her face, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. "I'm going to have you fired," he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing venom. "I'm going to buy this dump just to fire you. Then I'm going to sue you for the cost of the equipment. I will garnish your minimum wage paycheck until the day you die." He took a breath, straightening his jacket, trying to regain a shred of his dignity while coffee dripped down his leg. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, the classic line of the tyrant. "I am Richard Dalton. I own this city, and you are nothing." The diner was deadly silent. The rain hammered against the glass. Maggie looked at the stain on his pants, then up at his red, sweating face. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed, like a teacher watching a promising student fail a test on purpose. She carefully folded the rag and placed it in her apron pocket. She took a step closer to him, forcing him to hold his ground or step back. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered it. "I know exactly who you are, Richard," she said. Richard blinked. The use of his first name threw him off. "And," she continued, her voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly clear, "I know about the Ohio factories. I know about the cooked books in the Cayman subsidiaries. And I know that if you don't close the Meridian deal by 1 p.m., you aren't just broke, you're going to federal prison." Richard froze. His heart stopped beating for a second. The blood drained from his face. "How?" he stammered, his rage instantly replaced by confusion and terror. "Who are you?" Maggie picked up the coffee pot. "I'm just the waitress who offered you a refill," she said. "But if I were you, Mr. Dalton, I'd stop screaming and start listening. Because right now, the only thing standing between you and a cellmate named Tiny is the stupid cow holding the coffee pot." Richard Dalton felt the blood rushing in his ears, a roaring sound like a waterfall that drowned out the hum of the diner's refrigerator. He stood frozen, his hand halfway to his pocket to retrieve a phone that wasn't ringing. The Cayman subsidiaries. Those 3 words were not public knowledge. They weren't even board knowledge. Only 3 people in the world knew about the shell companies Richard had set up to hide the massive losses from the failed lithium venture in Nevada. Richard himself, his terrified lawyer George, and a banker in Zurich named Hans, who charged $10,000 an hour for his silence. "Who are you?" Richard whispered, his voice cracking. The arrogance that had coated him like armor just seconds ago was stripping away, leaving him naked and shivering. "Did Kensington send you? Are you wearing a wire?" He frantically scanned her pink uniform, looking for a bulge, a microphone, a camera, anything that would explain this nightmare. He looked around the diner. The construction worker was chewing his pie, oblivious. The cook was scraping a grill. It was maddeningly normal. Maggie sighed, a sound of heavy patience. She picked up a spray bottle and moved to the next table, turning her back on him. "Sit down, Richard. You're making a scene, and you look ridiculous with that coffee stain on your pants." "Don't walk away from me." Richard lunged forward, grabbing her arm. In an instant, the atmosphere in the diner shifted from quiet to lethal. The large, bearded cook in the kitchen slammed his spatula down with a clang, that rang like a gunshot. He stepped out from behind the pass, his arms crossed over a chest the size of a barrel. "Everything okay, Mags?" the cook rumbled. His voice was deep, gravelly, and held a threat that required no shouting. Maggie didn't look at the cook. She looked at Richard's hand on her arm. She raised one eyebrow. Richard released her as if her uniform were made of burning iron. He stepped back, hands raised. I just want answers." "Bear, it's fine," Maggie said to the cook. "Just a customer who had too much caffeine. Go flip the burgers." Bear glared at Richard for a long 5 seconds before retreating into the kitchen. Maggie turned back to Richard. Her eyes were hard now. "I'm not a spy, Richard, and I'm certainly not working for Kensington. That man couldn't organize a 2-car funeral." She sprayed the table and wiped it in rhythmic circular motions. "I'm just someone who reads. I read the margins, I read the footnotes, and I remember faces." "You're a waitress." Richard spat, though the venom was gone, replaced by desperation. "You serve eggs. You don't know about offshore accounts." "I serve eggs now," Maggie corrected him softly. She stopped wiping and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "But before I wore this apron, I wore suits that cost more than your car. I sat in boardrooms that made yours look like a kindergarten sandbox. I've structured deals that toppled governments in South America, and I know a desperate man when I see one." Richard's mind raced. He tried to place her face. He mentally scrolled through the Rolodex of every power player, every female CEO, every shark he had encountered in the last 20 years. Nothing. She was a ghost. "If you're so important," Richard sneered, trying to regain his footing, "why are you here? Why are you wiping tables in a hole in the wall in Chicago while I'm about to close a $6 billion merger?" Maggie smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching a rabbit run into a trap. "You aren't closing anything, Richard. Not today." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned flip phone. She placed it on the counter between them. "You mentioned the Meridian deal," she said casually. "You need the majority shareholder to sign off, the Atlas Group." Richard felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "How do you know about Atlas? That's a blind trust. No one knows who runs it." "Everyone has a boss, Richard," Maggie said. "Even the invisible ones." She tapped the flip phone. "You have about 10 minutes before your board reconvenes. You have no laptop. Your presentation is gone. Your pants are ruined. And you are currently trapped in a diner because your driver, poor Thomas, he really does try his best, just texted you to say the tow truck is an hour away." Richard patted his pockets. He had missed the vibration. He pulled out his phone. Sure enough, a text from Thomas Engine Block cracked. "Towing ERTA 60 minutes. Sorry, sir." He was trapped. "What do you want?" Richard asked, his voice low. "Money, is that it? You want a payout? I can wire you $500,000 right now. Just tell me who you are and how you know about the accounts." Maggie laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. "Money. It's always money with you boys. You think it's the universal solvent. It cleans up the spills, it fixes the broken engines, it silences the waitresses." She leaned in closer. "I don't want your money, Richard. I have enough money to buy this city and burn it down if I felt like it. What I want is to teach you a lesson." "A lesson?" Richard scoffed, though his hands were shaking. "Who do you think you are?" "My mother." "If I were your mother, I would have washed your mouth out with soap a long time ago," Maggie retorted. "No. I want to see if you have anything inside that suit other than greed and hot air. Because right now the Atlas Group is looking at your file, and they aren't impressed." Richard stared at her, The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You," he whispered. "You know the Atlas Group. You work for them." Maggie didn't answer. She just picked up the coffee pot again. "Refill it's on the house, since you're having such a bad day." Richard sat back down at the small, wobbly table. He felt faint. He looked at the black coffee Maggie had poured him. He didn't drink it. He just stared at the steam rising in the cold air of the diner. The Atlas Group was a legend in the financial world, a blind trust that appeared out of nowhere 10 years ago, buying up massive stakes in infrastructure technology and pharmaceuticals. They were the silent, hand-moving markets. No one knew who the principal was. Some said it was a Saudi prince. Others said it was a collective of retired tech billionaires. Richard had spent $2 million on private investigators trying to find a name, a face, anything to give him leverage for today's meeting. They had found nothing. And now an elderly waitress with bunions and a stain on her apron was implying she held the keys to the kingdom. His phone buzzed. It was George. Richard picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. "George, tell me good news." "Richard, we have a problem." George's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysterical. "We just got a communication from the Atlas proxy. And they've issued a pause order. They aren't voting yes. They aren't voting no. They're suspending the vote for 24 hours pending an ethical review of the acquiring CEO." Richard dropped the phone. It clattered onto the table. Ethical review. He looked up at Maggie. She was behind the counter, punching an order into the old cash register. She looked up, met his gaze, and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She had done this. In the 5 minutes since he had screamed at her, she had done this. But how she hadn't made a call. She hadn't touched a computer. Unless... Richard scrambled to pick up his phone. He looked at the time. 12:45 p.m. The meeting was in 15 minutes. He stood up and walked to the counter. He walked slowly this time, devoid of the swagger that usually carried him. He felt like he was walking to the gallows. "You stopped the vote," he said. It wasn't a question. Maggie didn't look up from counting change. "I didn't do anything, Richard. I'm just a waitress. Maybe the universe just decided to give you a time out. Stop playing games." Richard slammed his hand on the counter, but this time there was no fire in it, only fear. "You initiated an ethical review. Do you know what that does if they dig into the Nevada files? If they find the Cayman accounts?" "They will go to the SEC," Maggie finished for him. She closed the register drawer with a ding. "And then to the Department of Justice, and you will spend the next 15 years making license plates." She turned to face him fully. "It's a fragile thing, isn't it? A reputation. You spent 20 years building a monument to yourself, and it only took one rude comment to a service worker to bring it all crashing down." Richard swallowed hard. "How can I fix this?" "You can't fix it with a check," Maggie said sternly. "You can't fix it with a lawyer." "Then tell me what to do," Richard pleaded. "I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I am sorry. I'm sorry I yelled. I'm sorry I spilled the coffee. I'm under a lot of pressure." "Save it," Maggie cut him off. "I don't care about your apology. It's cheap. It's born of fear, not regret. You're only sorry because you got caught. You're only sorry because you realized the nobody you yelled at is actually a somebody." She walked around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She signaled to the construction worker, Joe. "Joe Hon, you want another slice?" "Nah, I'm good, Mags. Put it on my tab," Joe said, tipping his hard hat. "You take care now. Say hi to the grandkids." She smiled warmly. A genuine smile. One Richard realized he had never received in his life, not even from his own wives. She turned back to Richard. You want to save your company, Richard? You want to save your skin? Yes, he whispered. Then you're going to work, she said. Richard blinked. Work? I work 18 hours a day. No. Maggie shook her head. You move money around. You shout at people. You destroy things. That's not work. That's looting. She reached under the counter and pulled out a spare pink apron. It was stained and wrinkled. She tossed it at him. It hit his chest and slid down to the floor. Put it on, she commanded. Richard looked at the dirty pink fabric on the floor. He looked at his $5,000 ruined suit. He looked at Maggie. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? Maggie asked. Her face was stone. The vote is suspended for 24 hours. My shift doesn't end until 8 p.m. If you walk out that door, the Atlas Group votes no tomorrow morning, and the files go to the FBI. If you put that apron on and finish this shift with me, well, maybe we can talk about a second chance. You want me to wait tables? Richard asked, his voice incredulous. I am a CEO. And I am the woman holding the detonator to your life, Maggie said calmly. The lunch rush starts in 10 minutes, and we're short-staffed. Bear is slow on the grill and the dishwasher quit this morning. She pointed to the apron. Pick it up, or get out. Richard looked at the door. He could leave. He could run to his lawyers, try to fight the Atlas Group. But deep down, he knew it was impossible. He didn't know who she was, but he knew she had the power of a god. He had felt it the moment the vote was suspended. He looked at the apron. It was humiliating. It was insane. It was the only life raft in the ocean. Slowly, painfully, Richard Dalton, the man who owned half of Chicago, bent down. His knees cracked. He picked up the pink apron. Good, Maggie said, not skipping a beat. Tie it tight and wash your hands. You're on dish duty first. Richard stared at her, broken. Dish duty. You made a mess, Richard, Maggie said, pointing to the kitchen where steam and grease were billowing out. Now you're going to clean it up. As Richard walked toward the kitchen, walking past the stunned face of the young couple who had returned to pay their bill, he realized something terrifying. The meeting with the board wasn't the test. This was, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he was going to pass. The kitchen of Ma's Kettle was a circle of hell Richard Dalton had never visited. It was hot, oppressively, suffocatingly hot, and smelled of old onions and sanitizer. The noise was constant, the hiss of the flat-top grill, the clatter of plates, the shouting of Bear, who turned out to be the tyrant of this small domain. Move it, fancy pants. Bear roared, sliding a tray of dirty plates across the stainless steel counter. The trajectory was perfect. Grease and half-eaten ketchup smeared across Richard's already ruined dress shirt. Richard stood at the sink, his hands submerged in scalding soapy water. He was wearing the pink apron. He had taken off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing a Patek Philippe watch that was currently fogging up from the steam. I'm going as fast as I can, Richard snapped back, scrubbing a plate with a steel wool pad. Not fast enough, Bear yelled, flipping 4 burgers in rapid succession. We got a busload of tourists just pulled up. I need forks, I need plates. If I run out of clean silver, I'm using your tie to wipe the counter. Richard gritted his teeth. His back ached. His fingers were pruned and raw. He had been scrubbing for an hour. Every minute felt like a year. He looked through the service window, out into the dining room. It was chaos. The lunch rush had indeed arrived. The diner was packed with a tour group of elderly folks from Wisconsin. Maggie was a blur of motion. She moved with an efficiency that was almost beautiful to watch. She carried 4 plates on one arm, weaving between tables, pouring coffee, taking orders and smiling. Always smiling. Richard watched her handle a rude customer, a man complaining that his soup was cold. "I am so sorry about that sweetie," Maggie said, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "Let me heat that up for you personally, and I'll throw in a slice of cherry pie for the trouble." The man's anger evaporated instantly. He smiled back. "Thanks, Maggie. You're the best." Richard scoffed. It's an act, he thought. She's manipulating them just like I manipulate the board. But as he watched, he saw something else. He saw her slip a free sandwich to a homeless man who had come in from the rain. He saw her ask a regular about her hip surgery with genuine concern. He saw a community that revolved around this woman. "Hey, daydreamer." Bear slammed a pot onto the counter. "Scrub," Richard scrubbed. At 2:30 p.m., the rush finally died down. Richard slumped against the sink, exhausted. He was wet, dirty, and hungry. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. Maggie walked into the kitchen. She looked fresh as a daisy, not a hair out of place. She carried a plate with a burger and fries. "Break time," she said, setting the plate on a crate of onions. "Eat." Richard looked at the greasy burger. Usually he wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. His diet consisted of kale salads and poached salmon. But right now it smelled like the finest meal on earth. He grabbed the burger and took a massive bite. Grease ran down his chin. He didn't care. "Good?" Maggie asked, leaning against the doorframe. "It's acceptable," Richard mumbled with his mouth full. Maggie chuckled. "You wash dishes like a toddler, Richard. But you didn't quit. That's something." "I didn't have a choice," Richard said, wiping his mouth with a paper towel. "You're holding a gun to my head." "Sometimes a gun to the head is the only way to get a man to look at the view," Maggie said cryptically. "Who are you?" Richard asked again. "Really, you're not just a wealthy woman playing poor. You have power. The kind of power that doesn't come from just money." Maggie looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "I was you, Richard. 30 years ago." She walked over to the prep table and picked up a knife, idly chopping a carrot. "I was the CEO of Vanguard Logistics. I was the Iron Lady of Wall Street. I broke unions. I bought companies just to strip their assets. I had 4 houses, a yacht, and no friends. I had a son, too." She paused. The knife stopped moving. His name was David. He was a sweet boy. Artist. Sensitive. I wanted him to be a killer, like me. I pushed him. I bullied him. I told him he was weak because he didn't want to take over the business. Richard stopped chewing. The air in the kitchen grew heavy. "He died when he was 22. Maggie said, her voice steady but hollow. "Overdose. He was trying to numb the pain of being a disappointment to his mother." Richard didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Maggie said, resuming her chopping. "I deserved it. I killed him with my expectations. After the funeral, I looked at my empire, my billions, and I realized I was the poorest woman on earth. So I walked away." "You walked away from billions?" Richard asked, unable to comprehend. "I put it all in a trust, the Atlas Group. My mission became simple use, the money to stop people like me from ruining the world, to force ethical business practices, and to help the people I used to step on." She pointed the knife at Richard. "I bought this building 5 years ago. Mars Kettle was going to be demolished for a parking lot. I saved it. I work here because it keeps me grounded. It reminds me that the most important person in the room isn't the one signing the checks. It's the one serving the food." Richard stared at her. "So I'm your project. You're my second chance." "Richard," Maggie said, "you remind me of myself. Arrogant, blind, but you haven't killed anyone yet." At least not that I know of. But you're on the edge. That deal, the Meridian deal, you're cutting corners that will hurt thousands of families. It's business, Richard defended weakly. It's people. Maggie's voice cracked like a whip. Those are families in Ohio. Those are pensions. You think it's just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's lives. Before Richard could respond, the front door chime rang. But this wasn't the jingle of a customer. It was the heavy, authoritative sound of boots. "Maggie," a voice called out from the dining room. A voice Richard recognized. It was the governor of Illinois. Richard peeked through the service window. His jaw dropped. Standing in the entryway, flanked by 2 state troopers, was Governor Michael Sterling. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in a casual windbreaker. He looked tired. Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and walked out of the kitchen. "Mikey," she said warmly, "you look like hell. Sit down. I'll get the coffee." "Thanks, Mags," the governor said, collapsing into a booth. "It's been a week. The budget talks are stalled. The unions are threatening a strike. I needed, I don't know, sanity." Richard watched in disbelief. The governor of the state was calling a waitress Mags and coming to a greasy spoon for advice. Maggie poured him a cup of coffee and sat opposite him. They spoke in hushed tones. Richard strained to listen. "They're pushing me to sign the zoning bill for the new stadium," the governor said, rubbing his face. "But it's going to displace 3 neighborhoods. The developers are offering a lot of campaign money." "You know what the right thing is, Mike," Maggie said gently. "Money is just noise. People are the signal. If you sign that bill, you lose your soul, and you lose my support." The governor sighed. I know. It's just the pressure." "Pressure makes diamonds or dust," Maggie said. "Be a diamond, Mike." The governor chuckled. "You always know what to say. How's the knee?" "It's fine. Rain makes it ache." "And how's the project?" The governor gestured vaguely around the diner. "It's going well," Maggie said, glancing toward the kitchen window. She knew Richard was watching. "I have a new intern today. A bit of a slow learner, but he has potential." Richard ducked down, his heart hammering. Intern. The governor finished his coffee, stood up, and placed a $100 bill on the table. "No," Maggie said, pushing it back. "On the house." "Take it, Mags, for the charity fund," the governor insisted. "Fine. Give my love to Sheila." "Will do." The governor walked out. The troopers followed. The diner was quiet again. Maggie walked back into the kitchen. She found Richard sitting on the floor, staring at a bag of potatoes. "You know the governor," Richard stated. "I funded his first campaign for city council 20 years ago," Maggie said casually. "He was a good kid, honest. I make sure he stays that way." She looked down at Richard. "You see, Richard, power isn't about standing on a pedestal shouting, 'Look at me.' Power is sitting in a booth, listening and guiding. Power is invisible." Richard looked at his hands. They were red and raw. He looked at the pink apron. "I've been doing it wrong," he whispered. "My whole life. I thought fear was respect." "Fear is cheap," Maggie said. "Respect is expensive. You have to earn it." She extended a hand to help him up. Richard hesitated, then took it. Her grip was strong, calloused, and warm. "The dinner rush starts in 2 hours, Maggie said. "And it's Friday night. It's going to be brutal. You ready to quit? You can walk out now. I'll lift the pause order on the vote. You can go back to your life. You can merge your company, fire those people in Ohio, and buy another Maybach." Richard stood up. He thought about the boardroom, the suits, the fake smiles, the constant gnawing anxiety of the next quarter's earnings. Then he looked at the kitchen, the dirty floor, the steam, the smell of grease, and Maggie, the billionaire waitress who had found peace in service. "No," Richard said. He tightened the strings of his pink apron. "I'm not quitting. I have to finish the shift." Maggie smiled. This time it reached her eyes. "Good," she said, "because the grease trap needs cleaning." The Friday night dinner rush at Mars Kettle was not merely a busy shift, it was a chaotic, grease-splattered baptism by fire. If the lunch rush had been a skirmish, this was a full-scale war. By 7:15 p.m. the diner was at capacity. The air was thick with the scent of frying onions, roasted meat, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. In the back, the temperature had climbed to a suffocating 90 degrees. The ventilation hood rattled and hummed, fighting a losing battle against the smoke billowing from the flat-top grill. Richard Dalton, the man whose hands were insured for $1 million, and who had once fired an assistant for bringing him room-temperature sparkling water, was currently drowning in dishwater. His Italian dress shirt was translucent with sweat, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms slick with soap and grime. The pink apron, once a badge of humiliation, had become his armor. "I need plates. Dalton, move it!" Bear roared his voice, booming over the clatter of silverware. "I got meatloaf dying in the window. I'm going! Richard shouted back, his voice hoarse. He grabbed a stack of ceramic plates from the sanitizer rack. They were scalding hot, radiating heat that would have made the old Richard scream for a lawyer. The new Richard simply gritted his teeth, ignored the burn, and ran them to the pass. He turned on his heel, slipping slightly on a stray French fry, and dove back into the dish pit. He scraped half-eaten mashed potatoes into the trash, sprayed the plates, and racked them. His rhythm was clumsy but relentless. For the first time in his life, his mind wasn't on stock options or leverage ratios. It was on survival. It was on not letting Bear down. It was on the terrifying realization that if he stopped moving, the entire operation would collapse. He was a cog, a necessary, sweating, aching cog. And strangely, amidst the misery, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in decades' purpose. Then the dynamic shifted. Around 8 p.m, the bell above the door jingled aggressively. A group of 5 college students stumbled in, bringing with them a gust of rain and the loud, boisterous energy of the privileged and intoxicated. They were dressed in varsity jackets and expensive designer jeans, the uniform of the future masters of the universe. They took over the large corner booth, displacing a quiet, elderly couple who hurriedly asked for their check. Richard watched them through the service window as he scrubbed a pot. He saw the way they snapped their fingers. He saw the way they rolled their eyes when Maggie approached the table. He saw with a sickening jolt of recognition himself. "Hey, Grandma!" one of them shouted. He was a blonde kid with a jawline that screamed, "Trust fund." "We've been waiting like 3 minutes. Can we get some beers or what?" Maggie, balancing a tray of milkshakes for a family at the next table, paused and smiled, that professional steel-plated smile. "I'll be right with you, gentlemen. I just need to get these to table 4. "We don't want to wait," the blonde kid sneered, slamming his hand on the table. "My dad knows the owner of this block. I could have this place condemned by morning, so drop the shakes and get the beers." The kitchen went silent. Bear stopped chopping, but it was Richard who moved. He saw the kid reach out and grab Maggie's apron strings as she tried to walk past, jerking her back. "I'm talking to you, lady." Something inside Richard Dalton snapped. It wasn't the calculation of a CEO protecting an asset. It was the primal rage of a man watching dignity be assaulted. Richard dropped the steel wool. It landed in the sink with a wet splash. He didn't ask permission. He didn't take off his apron. He walked out of the kitchen, wiping his wet hands on his pants. He looked deranged, hair wild, face smeared with grease, eyes burning with a cold blue fire. He crossed the dining room in 4 long strides. The chatter in the diner died down as people noticed the menacing figure marching toward the corner booth. Richard stopped at the table. He loomed over the blonde kid, casting a long shadow. "Let go of her," Richard said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a subsonic rumble, the kind of voice that precedes an earthquake. The kid looked up, startled. He took in Richard's filthy appearance and laughed nervously. "Who are you?" "The dishwasher." "Go back to your hole, old man." Richard placed one hand on the table. He leaned in, bringing his face inches from the kid's. "I am the dishwasher," Richard whispered the words dripping with venom. "But until this morning, I was the man who approved the loan for your father's summer home in the Hamptons. I know because I recognize that watch you're wearing. It was a bonus gift for the platinum-tier clients at Dalton Kensington." The kid's smile faltered. "What?" "I know how the world works, son." Richard continued, his eyes boring into the kid's soul. "I know that you think you're untouchable. You think money is a shield. But I am telling you right now that if you do not let go of this woman and apologize with sincerity, I will make it my personal mission to dismantle your future." "You're crazy," the kid stammered, but he released Maggie's apron. "I am," Richard agreed. "I am a man who has lost $6 billion today. I have absolutely nothing left to lose, which makes me the most dangerous person you will ever meet. Now, apologize." The table was deathly silent. The kid looked at his friends for backup, but they were staring at their phones, terrified. He looked at Maggie, then back at Richard's unblinking gaze. He saw the truth there. This wasn't a bluff. I'm sorry," the kid mumbled, looking at the table. "Look at her," Richard barked. The kid flinched. He looked up at Maggie. "I'm sorry, Mom. It was uncalled for." "And leave a tip," Richard added, straightening up. "A big one. Then get out. We don't serve your kind here." The group scrambled. Wallets were opened. Cash was thrown haphazardly onto the table, mostly out of fear, and they practically ran for the door. Richard stood there, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving his hands shaking. He felt the eyes of every patron in the diner on him. Maggie looked at him. She adjusted her apron. Her expression was unreadable for a moment, and then her face softened. She reached out and touched his arm, the same arm the kid had grabbed. "Thank you, Richard," she said softly. Richard looked at her, then at the stunned diners. He cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. I need to get back to the dishes. Bear is going to kill me." He turned and walked back to the kitchen, head down. As he pushed through the swinging doors, a slow, rhythmic sound started behind him. One person clapping, then another, then the whole diner. Bear was waiting for him. The giant cook looked at Richard, then at the sink. "You missed a spot on that pot," Bear grunted, but he slid a fresh slice of pie onto the counter. "Eat first, then scrub." The shift ended at 10 p.m. The sign was flipped to closed. The mop bucket had been put away. Richard sat on a plastic milk crate in the back alleyway, the cold Chicago night air feeling like a blessing on his overheated skin. He was too tired to move. His $5,000 trousers were ruined beyond repair. His shoes were soaked. He smelled like old fryer oil. The back door opened, and Maggie stepped out. She held 2 bottles of cheap domestic beer. She handed one to Richard and sat on a crate opposite him, groaning slightly as she settled her weight. "You survived," she said, cracking her beer open. "Barely," Richard replied. He took a long pull from the bottle. It was the best beer he had ever tasted. I don't know how you do it. Every day. It's brutal. It's life, Maggie shrugged. It keeps you honest. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the steam rise from the vents. The 24 hours are up at 9 a.m., Richard said, breaking the silence. His voice was heavy. They are, Maggie confirmed. She didn't look at him. She watched the streetlights flicker. I'm going to kill the deal, Richard said. Maggie turned her head. The Meridian deal. If you walk away, the stock drops 40%. The board will crucify you. You'll lose your liquidity. I know, Richard said. He looked at his hands, raw red, blistered. But those files, the ones you know about, the Nevada cover-up, the Ohio closures. I looked at the numbers again in my head while I was washing the dishes. I was going to fire 12,000 people, Maggie. 12,000 people who have families, who have kids like that brat who came in tonight. He took a deep breath. I can't do it. I'd rather be broke. I'd rather be the dishwasher. You're sure? Maggie asked. Her eyes were sharp, searching his face for any sign of deception. I'm sure, Richard said. I used to think being powerful meant no one could tell you no. Tonight I realized that being powerful means having the strength to protect people who can't protect themselves. I don't want to be a shark anymore. I want to be, I don't know, a human being. Maggie smiled. It wasn't the polite smile she gave customers or the wolfish smile she had given him earlier. It was a smile of genuine pride. She reached into her pocket and pulled out his smartphone. She slid it across the crate to him. Make the call, she said. Richard looked at the phone. To whom, George? No, Maggie said. To the Atlas Group. Richard froze. What? The ethical review is complete. Maggie said, her voice taking on that tone of immense hidden authority. The Atlas Group has decided to vote yes, but not on the Meridian acquisition. She leaned forward. We are voting yes to a hostile takeover of your board. We're buying out the majority shares. We're firing the directors who pushed for the Ohio closures. And we are reinstating the CEO. Richard stared at her, his mouth slightly open. You're keeping me. We're keeping the man who stood up for a waitress, Maggie said firmly. We're keeping the man who washed dishes for 8 hours to fix a mistake. We're keeping the man who just decided to lose a fortune to save 12,000 strangers. She clinked her beer bottle against his. You passed the test, Richard. Welcome to the Atlas Group. Now finish your beer. You're opening tomorrow. Shift starts at 6 a.m. And don't be late. Bear hates it when you're late. Richard looked at the phone, then at Maggie, and finally up at the narrow strip of sky between the buildings. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on his chest was gone. He was tired, he was dirty, and he had a lot of work to do. But as he raised the bottle to his lips, Richard Dalton smiled. He was finally truly rich. Richard Dalton did show up at 6 a.m. the next day, and every Saturday for the next 5 years. He saved his company, but not by cutting costs, by investing in people. He turned the Ohio factories into model plants for green energy. He became a legend, not for his wealth, but for his turnaround. And Mars Kettle. It's still there. If you go on a Saturday morning, you might see a grey-haired man in a pink apron washing dishes in the back. He doesn't look like a billionaire. He looks like a guy who knows the value of a clean plate. Maggie still runs the floor, the silent guardian of the city, watching the powerful and the powerless, reminding us all that you never know who you're talking to. So be kind. Be humble. Because the person serving your coffee might just hold the keys to your future. Wow. What a journey. From the height of arrogance to the dish pit of redemption. Richard's story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't what you have in the bank, but how you treat the people around you. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and the power of humility, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these important lessons with more people. And if you want more stories about karma redemption and the hidden heroes of everyday life, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. We want to hear from you. Have you ever had an encounter that changed your perspective on life? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind, always. You never know who's watching.